scripture this morning comes from the Gospel of Luke. This is chapter 17. It's verses 11 through 19. On the way to Jerusalem, Jesus was going through the region between Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, 10 lepers approached him. Keeping their distance, they called out, saying, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." When he saw them, he said to them, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were made clean. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. He prostrated himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. And he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus asked, "Were not 10 made clean? But the other 9, where are they? Was none of them found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?" Then he said to them, "Get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Last week we began for the month of October talking about holy humility. What does it mean to be humble? Why is it important? We talked about the idea of pride being the root of many other sins, but humility is the antidote. Last week, Jesus told us a parable about obedient and humble slaves. We saw how when we humbly obey the commands of God, we are blessed. Well, today we're picking up right where we left off last week in the Gospel of Luke with another lesson about humility. There are a few key details to understand about today's story. This is a wonderful example of Luke's amazing storytelling ability, where he puts so many important things in the way he tells the story. First, Luke mentions that Jesus and his disciples were on their way to Jerusalem. This is a theme that Luke repeats over and over in this part of the gospel. He's constantly reminding his readers that Jesus was going to Jerusalem. At first, it might just seem repetitious. Okay, we know Jesus is going to Jerusalem. That's where they are. But it means something to us. Those of us who have read ahead and know the end of the story, we know why Jesus is going to Jerusalem. It's so that he can give himself to be tortured and killed and then raised again for our salvation. So each time Luke says, "on the way to Jerusalem," we're reminded again about Jesus' purpose and goal for his life, to give us life through his sacrifice. That's the first example of humility here. So that's the background idea Luke sets us up with. And then he tells us our setting, which is important too. He says Jesus and his friends were traveling between Galilee and Samaria. Now, Galilee was the northernmost province of Israel. That was where Jesus was raised. There were mostly Jews that lived up there. That's where Jesus did a lot of his early preaching and his healing. Samaria was south of Galilee, and it was north of Judea. Judea is where Jerusalem was. That's where they were going down here. And now they're going in between Galilee and Samaria. This is where the Samaritans lived. Now in that time, Jews and Samaritans were groups of people that did not get along. Jews at this time kind of considered Samaritans to be wannabe Jews, fake Jews, who said that they worshiped the same God, but they didn't do it right because they didn't worship in the temple. To the Jew, a Samaritan was usually thought of as the worst of the worst, below scum. Most Jews, if they had to travel between Judea down here and Samaria, Galilee up here, they would spend the extra time, they'd go all the way around Samaria instead of going through it, just to not be soiled by those Samaritans. They wouldn't even set foot in the place. Well, now Jesus is kind of in the between zone, between the Jewish territory and Samaritan territory. And he comes upon a group of people with leprosy. Now this was a mixed crowd. because people with skin conditions like leprosy, they were rejects, both from the Jewish culture and the Samaritan culture, so they all kind of tended to band together, no matter where they came from. These people with leprosy clearly had heard of Jesus. They saw him going by, they recognized him and thought, "Ooh, that's our hope. Maybe he can help us." So they shout out, "Jesus, Master, come have mercy on us." Luke says that when Jesus saw them, he answered their cry for help. He gave them a command. It was a simple one. Go to your nearby priest and show yourself to them. Now, in Jesus' time, people with diseases like this, like leprosy, they were considered unclean. They were unfit to worship with other people. So if you were sick and unclean, but then you recovered, you'd have to go to a priest and prove that you were clean again. And they would approve you and you could come back into worship. So this is what Jesus sent these people to do. And we see that they all obeyed. Jesus sent them to go, and they at least had enough faith to say, "Okay, I'll go and see what happens." But one man had a little more faith than the rest. 1 out of 10. When he realized that he'd been healed, Luke says he turns back and goes back to Jesus. Luke paints the picture so well, I think. I can imagine it. I can see them walking, and the man looks down at his hands, and he sees that he's cured. And he turns around and he begins to run back. He's overflowing with joy. Luke says he's shouting praises to God. And Luke says when he makes it back to Jesus, he throws himself down on the ground in front of Jesus' feet and he thanks him. Can you picture this? It's beautiful, it's joyful in my mind. But then comes the twist in the story that I love. This one man out of all the others who came back to Jesus to say thank you was not who you would expect. He was a Samaritan. To us, it might not make much difference whether he was a Jew or a Samaritan.